Dr. Jeff Engel is the director of the Center for Presidential History at SMU. It occurs to me that sound that we just heard there, many of the Trump voters, he talked about 401ks, retirement pension, college savings account, many of the people, not all folks, but many of the people who voted for him don't have those.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is what we're seeing at this point, 1 year in, is essentially the tail end, if you will, of the last administration's policies. I like to say that at the first year, at the State of the Union for the first time, is when the president really begins to own the economy. And as you point out, many of his voters have really not seen the benefits of this economy. As the stock market soars, they haven't actually seen more jobs come through.
Right, or rising wages. I mean, the wages are going up. They were already going up.
Right, I mean, that's what we're seeing. Everything that the president talked about last night was part of a longer-term trend line. And I think everything going forward, you could really say is partly his policy.
You did say that you viewed the president as, in your terms, remarkably subdued last night. What does that mean, if anything, for this president?
You know, we all know that Donald Trump's problem politically is that he sometimes says things that offend, and consequently this was really an amazing case for him being calm, being subdued. It was almost as though he was really trying to hold himself within, and one way you can tell is that he basically had no off-camera asides. He basically stuck to the teleprompter the entire time. Now, one of the things that's going to be really interesting to see is whether or not he can now stay on message that he's delivered. Every time he's given a big teleprompter speech in the past, within about 48 hours the Twitter comes out again and changes the frame and changes the dialogue.
Right. Does he go from sticking to the script to going on Twitter and referring to members of his own political party as Senator Jeff Flakey and Little Bob Corker? You know, that doesn't help him when he comes and says, I have an agenda and I want you to vote with me.
Exactly, and I think breaking down the speech, it's really fascinating that there really was something for everybody in this speech. I mean, most presidents try to give a unifying speech, of course, at the State of the Union, but what was fascinating was that the tone was subdued, the language was subdued. The president said we can all come together, we should all work together, we should all compromise, and then in between those statements were smaller comments, you know, discussing immigrants, for example, in the same sentence as discussing gang members. The kind of thing that essentially would make his base feel that he is still talking to them, while you can still turn around and say, well, look, he said we're all going to be on the same page.
If you're looking at every one of these State of the Union speeches, we look for one line that we say, oh, that's the line from this speech. This might be it. Let's listen.
Stands tall over one more monument. This one, this Capitol, this living monument, this is the monument to the American people.
What was it that struck you about that line and that part of the speech as being memorable?
Two things in particular. The first is, this is, I think, really Donald Trump's first attempt as president to offer soaring rhetoric. I mean, let's face it, he is not known as a great speech giver, he's known as a great line giver. And this is the first time, I think, that he actually allowed his speechwriters to craft him a vision that he would try to stay to try to speak to history in many ways. It's the first time, if you will, that he tried to soar. But at the same time, it really was something which is completely different than what he has been saying, you know, out on the campaign trail, and then also in his first year of office.
Very quickly, the Democratic response, a line from a Massachusetts congressman with a fairly familiar name.
And to all the dreamers out there watching tonight, let me be absolutely clear. Ustedes son parte de nuestra historia. Vamos a luchar por ustedes. Y no nos vamos a alejar. You are part of our story. We will fight for you, and we will not walk away.
Pretty good Spanish from Representative Joe Kennedy there, reaching out to a new constituency that both parties need for the future. Maybe not for the midterm elections, but for the future they do.
Right, and I think looking at both of those speeches together, what I'd like people to do is to look not at the words, but at the subtext. So the fact that Representative Kennedy spoke in Spanish really appealed to people who are going to be concerned about the immigration debate, concerned about who is an American, concerned about a broadening American identity. President Trump, conversely, used gang language to talk about immigrants in the same sentence, had people come to the speech last night whose family had been hurt by gang members and immigrants. So consequently, the subtext is that President Trump is saying these immigrants are not part of us. Note, for example, that President Trump used the word American frequently, not the United States of America.
Interesting. The kind of parsing of the words that a historian will look at. Thanks as always.
Good to see you.